Oh, okay. Share the screen again. And I'll do a very quick recap here just to say that these are the compression, some of the compression schemes we've talked about. Lossless compression keeps all the data, large files, lots of processing, you know, in that price, speed, quality triangle. Lossless is the quality angle. And if you want high quality, you've got to pay the price and the time. Lossy is what we use because of the practicalities. There's a number of reasons for it, as we've discussed. And but the problem with lossy is data gets literally lost, which is why it's called lossy. Just in case anyone was curious about that. The example here where we've got an image on the right, sorry, on the left with 2000 plus kilobits per second. And on the right, we have an image with about a quarter. And the text is incorrect, by the way. I just realized that it says on the top file data rate of 2.1 megabits on the left. It's 2.1 kilobits on the left. It's not megabits. So I'll have to fix that later. And 504. So a quarter of the bandwidth on the right. The image is the data. In order to make a picture out of that little amount of data, you have to sacrifice something, right? Remember, again, price, speed, quality. We lower the quality of we lower the speed of the bandwidth, and we get a lower quality picture. But what we gain, right, is the speed. It's a faster image to make. So just so you know, the reason you would choose the image on the right is that it doesn't matter to you that the quality is important, but you might want to get that image out quickly. You might want to have a narrow, poor Wi-Fi connection. If someone's having a hard time seeing something on Wi-Fi or on wireless cellular, you can reduce the bandwidth until the image runs smoothly. If you guys have seen, you witness Zoom and you notice how sometimes videos don't play smoothly, that's because the bandwidth that's being fed to you is higher than the bandwidth you can accept. And Zoom, unlike YouTube, isn't particularly good at throttling bandwidth per client. So one of the strengths of YouTube is that they automatically adjust bandwidth for you, right? YouTube is always monitoring the bandwidth when you're watching a video, and it's trying to make adjustments for your viewing pleasure to get a smooth image, right? Not the highest quality unless you tell it to. You can go into YouTube and say, I want the highest quality. Otherwise, it'll automatically try and throttle the bandwidth for you.
I have a quick question about that.
Yes.
Because I actually don't really understand a lot of this quite well. Is like fiber optics
yes
make it go faster because of
so fiber optics is a wider pipe. I mean, all the fiber optics does, like, if you forget for a minute that it's not wire, like it's actually fiber, glass fiber, don't worry about how it's happening. The whole point of changing from copper wire, which is your standard internet connections, back in the day, to fiber optics is that fiber optics, the bandwidth increases are huge. Now, here's the challenge, of course. The phone company or your provider sells you that fiber optics gives you, double or triple or whatever bandwidth, which means you can get better quality, right? Price, speed, quality. You've got a higher speed to get better quality. So at a higher cost, right? The price is you have to pay more money for them for every month. But the secret is that they don't tell you is that they need the fiber optics more than you do because they're trying to feed more homes with fewer wires. So while they offer you some more bandwidth, they don't offer you the maximum of fiber optics because they want to give that to more people. So the reason for that is that if you were to wire up a condo building with wire, it would cost a lot of money and you'd have to run wires to every place, and you get a very limited bandwidth. But you can wire up all those same apartments with fiber and get a much better speed and return on your investment for the phone company. So unfortunately, like industrial users of fiber optics get the entire pipe to themselves and have incredible speeds. And so you'll watch guys, for example, like Linus Tech Tips and such, and they'll have fiber right to the house. They'll have their own pipe, with a reserved amount of space. You and I don't get that. We don't get those choices because no matter what you do at the internet, you're still sharing the connection with other people, right? But to answer your question more directly, fiber optics is just a wider pipe, which means you can increase the bandwidth. So the problem, again, and I keep saying that, I say it with all these hesitations because yes, you can increase the bandwidth. So if you get fiber to your house, you can now pump out high quality videos. The problem is you don't know who's getting what at the other end, right? Because they might not be on fiber. They might be on Wi-Fi. So you've got fiber optics to your house, and then you're on Wi-Fi on your laptop in the backyard, assuming you have a backyard. You might only be getting a quarter or less of the bandwidth because the Wi-Fi signal is limited, right? So there's a whole bunch of pinch points.
Thanks.
A bit of a mug's game.
So like if we were doing a shared presentation, maybe someone with the fiber optics should host that. Would that be
Well,
they stream faster?
yeah, if you're trying to pump something high resolution, then you want the fastest pipe you can get. So if you're pushing off, for example, you're showing an HD or 4K video with low compression because you want the quality and you don't have the hardware and software to manage the bandwidth the way YouTube does, yeah, the simplest answer is get a wider pipe, which means go fiber optics.
Thank you for clarifying all that. Thank you.
No problem. And so, by the way, 5G is the same idea in Wi-Fi. So 5G is trying to widen the pipe for wireless, right? And the way 5G is going to work when it finally comes to play is, and I suspect, no one's saying this, but I suspect this is the case. 5G is high bandwidth, short distance, right? So in order to get 5G bandwidth on your phones and Wi-Fi devices, you sacrifice the distance. You can be 1,000 yards away on an old 2G or 3G Wi-Fi connection and still have a connection. You can't be that far away. Well, I shouldn't say, I can't give you numbers, but you can't be far away from a 5G access point. So the secret to that is, and here's my conspiracy theory, you can share it if you will, and that is that the reason that the phone companies and providers are pushing fiber to everybody's home is that they're going to activate 5G transmission in your neighborhoods from your house. So they'll put and here's how it works. And this is how I think this is going to work, because I know how the system goes. When they run 5G to your house, when they run fiber optics to your house, they own everything right up until the box on the outside wall, right? It's called the demarcation point. Everything inside the house is yours. The wiring, the modem, all that stuff. Now you may rent that stuff, but it's under your control. But you contractually give the phone company the right to put whatever they need to right up to that box. So here's my conspiracy theory. What's to stop them from putting a 5G transmitter on the side of your house? So every house on your street has 5G, which means everyone walking down the street on their phones can now get 5G, short range, high bandwidth, right? Now that doesn't hurt you, but I've got a feeling that's one of the reasons they're pushing fiber. Anyway, conspiracy theory over. Where were we? Oh, we were talking about compression. And now I've just recorded that for posterity. So if anyone's listening at the CRTC, my name is J. Fred Muggs, and I live in Saskatchewan. Oh, there we go. So moving on, this is where we left off. What this slide is going to say is that you want the highest bandwidth you can afford, right? Whether it's cost, whether it's resolution. If your resolution's too high, you have to lower your bandwidth to allow it. But you want to keep that bandwidth number up, right? If you can. Codec, this is a quick recap of what codecs are: encode, decode, right? There's a whole bunch of different ones. So here we have, remember I talked about codecs and containers, I think, briefly last week in that fog of codec talk. So here's an example with H.264 in the column. If we look at target just means where the file or the streaming is going to end up. So computer playback, like on web, HTML5 on the web, such as not YouTube particularly, but clicking on a file to watch a video. Live streaming, that would be YouTube, perhaps adaptive streaming. Mobile devices, right? Again, clicking on a single file compared to a mobile device watching a live stream. Set-top boxes, Roku, Apple TV, DVDs and Blu-ray. Okay, so those are the targets for your image, if you will, your video. So you'll notice that almost all of them use H.264 as a codec in this example. They don't all in reality, but in this example, they would all use H.264 as a codec, but they would have a different container format. So the computer playback, where you'd have a file, you'd click on it, would have an extension of .mp4, right? But inside that container file is an H.264 encoded video, right? Computer playback would have a number of different options: MP4, MPEG, TS, F4F. These are different streaming formats. Mobile device would have that MP4 container, and on and on. A DVD would have an MPEG extension, or a Blu-ray might have an MPEG extension, right? They're all containing the same data, but they're just presented to the device. So this is the thing you have to remember. The codec is the video. So when we talk about encoding video for playback, we're generally talking about the codec being the video and audio. I shouldn't keep saying just video. The container is just what signals the device how to respond to that file. right? That's the whole kind of difference. And this is a kind of wordy definition from Wikipedia. A container format is a meta file format. And what it allows you to do, and the reason that and even he says in this presentation, container formats are very technical. What it allows you to do is dump a whole bunch of data into a package and deliver that package as one thing, right? So you have to send video, you have to have audio synchronized with it, which means you have to have another file somewhere in there. There's 3 files that synchronize the audio and video together. So when you encode the audio and video in a stream right now, they won't play in sync with each other unless there's another file somewhere in there synchronizing those two, because they're 2 separate files. They've been encoded with 2 different codecs. The video has been encoded with MPEG. The audio could be AAC. It could be uncompressed, right? So they're really 2 distinct files, but they live in the same container. And this container is your file, your MOV file, your all your different files. In that file is also a data file that tells, with all the time codes in it, that tells the player, whether it's your web streaming or your DVD or your phone, that at this point in the video, this audio frame belongs there, and that keeps them in sync. That's why we have container formats, right? So, and this is kind of a really cheesy, poor illustration of this. And don't worry about any of this text on the left. I just want to use this drive, but you can see the file header has a bunch of information as well, right? There's a bunch of other data in there in that container besides just the audio and video. That's all I'm trying to get at. Here's some of the most common container formats: MP4, MOV. FLV is gone now. Flash was just decommissioned about a month or 2 ago. There's M4V for iTunes, M4A, .ts, which is a transport stream. These are container formats. They all contain the same video or audio. They just tell the device how to respond. So when you have a web browser and you click on and you don't see the file extension in a live stream, but you're fed a stream with a .ts extension, your web browser knows, oh, this is a live stream. Here's the kind of things I have to do to play it to my viewer. All right. And I'm not going to get into which container to use because it's kind of varies on the project. You can select it in Media Encoder. So when you go to the export settings, you get a choice, right, to select the container format. And there's a couple of, for example, if you're sending something to Avid, and in this example here, you have DNxHD. So you know that if I'm going to edit this in Avid, I'll wrap it in a DNxHD container. It'll be, as we've discussed before, DNxHD, it'll be an AVC, probably all intra file. But if you wrap it in a DNxHD container, then the Avid software knows immediately what that file is and how to deal with it. If you don't, and you don't have to, but then what's going to happen is the Avid software, or in this case, because it's DNxHD, the Avid software will have to rewrap that file to recognize it, right? And that'll take a couple of extra seconds. Okay. Now Premiere, just so you know, Premiere doesn't do this wrapping unless you ask it to. But what it does do is it wraps it all up at the end. So it lets you play all these files, quote unquote, natively on the timeline. But then when you go to render them out, then it does all this chunking and wrapping, right? So it has to happen at some point in the process. It's just how transparent is it to you? And I'm going to move on from here because we're not talking about DVD multiplexing. So the other thing to remember about container formats when we talk about live streaming is that there's also error correction. So this is something you don't have in a digitized file. If you take a file and encode it for playback as a file, like for example, you have to deliver a file onto Dropbox for instructor, there's no error correction and synchronization data in that container. It isn't required, other than the synchronization of just simply saying this audio frame goes to this video frame, which is very rudimentary. But with streams, error correction is really important because, as you all know, the stream can stop and start. You can pause it. You can buffer it so that you pause the stream, the live event keeps happening, and then you can play a few seconds later, pick up where you left off, but the live stream is ahead of you, right? You understand? So then you can go live if you want and skip back to real time. All that kind of stuff requires error correction that is a function of live streaming. So live streams are very powerful in codecs and containers, I'm sorry, but live streams themselves can be very unreliable because there's so many variables. You know, it's everything from like an unexplained termination. You can be watching a live stream, somebody comes in the room and you quickly close the lid on your laptop, or you exit the app on your phone right in the middle of the stream, right? Now that breaks the stream for you. And when you come back, depending on your app, you come back to that stream later, you might be able to come back right at that same frame or not. That doesn't typically happen with files. In other words, you don't start downloading a file and simply shut your computer off in the middle of the download, unless you're not paying attention. And hey, who hasn't done that? So downloaded files aren't really set up for that kind of error correction. But streams definitely are, because there's so much that can happen in the real world. You could be watching a stream while you're moving, and say you're on the bus watching a video on your phone, and then the bus goes into the tunnel or under a bridge and the stream is interrupted. Well, you want it to be designed to pick right up where you left off, right? When you get back into range. So that's the kind of technology that live stream containers have. And they're more important for live streaming really than for files, but the containers exist for both. So I hope that I'll leave the summary. So basic video settings. Now here's where I would be opening Encoder, and I'm just going to skip to here. So we'll try it without Encoder. I mean, see, this is the problem. There's not enough real estate on the screen to do both. And that's kind of one of the reasons I kind of went this route this week. And I was kind of reluctant to record this. So let's try this way, and maybe we'll go back and open up Media Encoder after this is over. I'll let you tell me. So first off, you can pick the resolution, right? So if we look at our menu, this is our basic video settings. You'll see this in Media Encoder when you start a stream, or when you export in Premiere, you'll get this basic video settings menu. That's kind of what these areas that we're talking about next refer to. So the resolution is the first one, right? And 9 times out of 10, you're going to use the same resolution as your source. But if the file's too big, you can, so for example, in the case of HD, 1920 by 1080, if your file's too big, you could cheat it down to the old HD standard of 1280 by 720. It's the same aspect ratio, but it's a smaller file size. It's a bit of a cheat. And again, YouTube pulls this one off. If you go, let me demonstrate, because a picture's worth 1,000 words. Let me just demonstrate here with what have I got? Oh yeah.
Welcome.
Okay, so is the menu visible when I do that? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. So I will hang on. Share screen. Zoom. Share screen. I won't bother sharing sound because we don't need to hear this guy. It's just for the illustration menu. So here we are, right? You're looking at a YouTube. You guys can see this. You're looking at a YouTube frame. This is the.
Today is a special day, the first Ferrari on Throttle House. And even though Canada's locked down, we've thrown caution to the wind and we've managed to get out and come here to beautiful continental Europe, a place a Ferrari is supposed to be driven. Goodbye, snowy.
James, what are you doing?
What?
I told you not to spend our money on a green.
Okay, so just want to show a bit of the video. Now you'll notice when you go to the YouTube menu, you get a bunch of different quality choices, right? Well, all of these top 4 choices are all maintaining the aspect ratio. So if I now go to 720p and play the same clip, you will probably not notice a quality difference.
Green screen, and it doesn't work if you're wearing green pants.
It might. And what about the rest of the review?
It's obviously winter.
Just let me have this.
So you guys, again, this is so hard to demonstrate over Zoom because I don't know what quality you're going to be able to see. But so I've dropped the quality from the original 4K, right, which is here. And this may not play at all for you. I don't know. I'm watching on my other machine. Yeah, it's very jerky, right? So now if I take it down to 720, does it get any smoother? Not really. Oh, no. It's a little bit better. Okay, so stop share. Start share. So my point being that you can cheat the resolution if you need to, right? Unless You have to maintain that file resolution for other reasons. But if you're just something showing it to somebody, or you want to show it to your friends, or it's not for like submission to a school project where the resolution is set in your project specifications, by all means, that's one way you can reduce bandwidth, because your chunk, think about all the fact, all this image area here is not being sent, right? You're chunking off a whole bunch of resolution. Oh. And again, all this graphic is going to show you, which is what I've said about 10 times already, is it really depends on your target, right? This is the key right here. We shoot in resolutions from 720 by 280. Well, that's old, but up to 4K. But we distribute in all kinds of resolutions depending on the target. So again, for you guys at school here, you're often being given the resolution. You're being given the parameters, right? But what I'm talking about now is when you get the choice. And you can see, for example, what resolution gains for you. That if you took a 720 HD picture, you'd have 921,000 pixels versus a 640 by 360 where you have 230,000 pixels, right? So you've got, again, almost a quarter the number of pixels to play with. And therefore you could even go down to 640 by 360, maintaining the 16 by 9 aspect. It really depends on what it's for. So a real world example of this would be a client wants to see, or your teammates, right? They want to know, hey, how's it going? How's the editing happening? And you say, well, hang on, let me send you an output. Well, if you sent them an output at 640 by 360 with the understanding that the resolution's poor, you have to let everybody know, look, I've lowered the resolution to make a smaller, quicker file. It'll play more smoothly on your phone or wherever you are. That's totally fair. And that happens all the time. This is what a proxy is. Have you guys dealt with proxies? Don't make me ask Veronica to answer for the class. Go on, someone else.
No, not yet.
Have you? So this, if you've dealt with proxies in editing, and you probably have, this is what the essence of proxies is you're literally choosing a smaller file just in order to get the technology to work for you. So in the case of 4K, proxies are very common because most computers today have a hard time with 4K. My MacBook Pro struggles with 4K, even though it's only 2 years old, because 4K files are huge. And remember, when we talk about 4K, when you're editing, every video channel, every track you put in your Premiere project is another 4K track. So it's full 4K bandwidth on each track, right? So you stack 3 or 4 tracks up on your timeline, and pretty soon your computer's like, no, I can play 2, maybe 3, I can't play 4. So even that title track, although titles are handled a little bit differently, does add more bandwidth to your playback. So what do we do instead? Well, you know what? We'll work in proxy mode. We'll work with a 640 by 360 file. And then when we're finished, we'll edit the whole thing back into 4K. And there's magic behind that Dave Barenbaum can explain. Not that I don't understand it, but we don't have time to get into it here. So anyway, that's the importance of resolution. Okay, so the bottom line here is the 720 version of the file is 4 times more compression, right? So the data it'll make the picture look worse. So this is the other point. You're thinking, well, the resolution in the 640 file is going to look poorer than the one in the 720 file, right? Yes, it will. The resolution will be lower, but because the compression is higher in the 720 file, the resulting compressed file will look even worse than that 640 file will look, because you're compressing less, you're compressing more data. So you're going to do more damage to it because it's lossy compression. All right. So the bottom line is, make sure you know what the target's supposed to be. Don't exceed the resolution of your target. Like never output on a file resolution higher than your target needs to be. Like don't output 4K for HD, please. Everybody does it or has done it or tried it, and sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. If there's ever a doubt, and here's something that, I don't know if you've been taught this already, but if there's ever a doubt when you're in editing, output 20 seconds with some audio only. Take part of your clip, put an in and out point, and export just between the in and out points, 20 seconds at whatever desired settings you want. Take that resulting file, because it'll only take a few seconds to make that file, won't take hours or minutes. Play it, see how it plays. You know, in your phone, wherever you're concerned about, if it's going to be in the projector in the studio, whatever you might be playing it in. Don't ever output an entire file to do tests with, because it just takes, unless your project's at 30 seconds or something. It's just, otherwise it's a pain in the butt. Okay. Aspect ratio, and we'll talk a bit more about that a little later. But aspect ratio is just the height to width ratio, right? We letterbox the old standard def because there isn't any picture on the sides. It's only 4 units wide by 3 tall. And so compared to 16 by 9, there is some data missing. And as a result, we fill those areas in the sides with black. Right now, what's wrong about this video, or this presentation, is that he calls these letter boxes. There's actually specific terms we'll talk about in the next lecture. But letterboxing is the horizontal bars, the top and bottom black bars, right? That's when you have the opposite going on, where you take a widescreen picture and put it into a narrow screen image. But this is what's called a pillar box, where the bars go up and down, all right? And the reason I say that is because a letterbox is called letterbox because it looks as though you're looking through a letter slot in your front door, that narrow, wide image, okay? But anyway, the aspect ratio is the height to width. You're always going to work in square pixels unless you're working in old school standard def, or if you're doing some sort of anamorphic trickery. Now you're probably doing neither of the last two, so I would say always default to square pixels, and that should be your default when you fire up Premiere. But again, if you want to, you'll need to change that pixel ratio if you're working with either anamorphic images, and I don't know if you guys have covered that yet. Well, that's a different kind of a lens, or if you're working with old school standard def analog video. All right. Field order, don't worry about field order because that's to do with DVDs. So remember there's interlace, right? So you've got 2 fields, and all that the field order thing is for is old school DVDs used to start field 2 first, and high definition starts field 1 first. Never worry about this. I'm just telling you right now. It's in this because it's in this. NTSC, you're going to pick the NTSC standard, of course, and PAL if you're exporting to the rest of the world. So remember that if you are exporting a file, by the way, this is not for streaming. If you're exporting a file for delivery somewhere else in the world, I would export 2 versions. I'd have an NTSC and a PAL version. And that does your client a favor by having it converted ahead of time. So if you're working with someone who's in Brazil, or I shouldn't say Brazil, I'm not sure if Brazil is PAL anymore. Then you can make that switch. And again, these are for people who are, as I say, in Europe, not North America. All right. When in HD, keeping in mind, if we're talking HD and 4K, there is no such thing as NTSC and PAL. It's 24, 25 frames per second. That all goes back to the camera. And the speed, the frame rate chosen in the camera. So bit rate. So here's the real nugget of this whole sort of lecture is the bit rate. This is where you can make some manual changes if you're in trouble. And I do this all the time with my lectures now, not every week, but sometimes the files of my lectures are too big. And I can go in and manually adjust the bit rate to get the file size I need. Because remember what I said last week, that the bit rate determines the file size. It doesn't matter the resolution or the quality. So in other words, if you heavily compress a file, high compression, but you choose a high bit rate, you'll get a big file anyway. You'll lose the benefit of that compression. If you manually intervene and increase the bit rate, you'll increase the file size, but you won't add any more data. What happens is that the bit rate goes up, the container file recognizes that you've got a higher bit rate and it reserves more space. So automatically the bit rate's adjusted in conjunction with the codec, but if you need to make manual adjustments, here you go. So most bit rate encoding for streaming is constant, and that means that the bit rate never changes throughout the video, but there's also another kind we'll talk about in a second called variable bit rate. And again, this is all about the pipe. So if you've done your compression and the file still won't play properly with your client, you can go into this menu on the video tab in Media Encoder, and I'll open it again. I think I should have to open this later and show it to you. And you can manually adjust the bit rate yourself and tweak it down even further. The file will degrade. Remember, as you lower the bit rate, the file will go down in quality anyway, but sometimes you have no choice, all right? And just don't worry about these connection speeds because those are all out of date. So bitrate encoding encoding settings. And I'm going to skip through all this. So basically, there's 2 things you need to worry about or concern yourself with, and that is whether it's constant bitrate or variable bitrate. So variable bitrate is a much better system because it analyzes the image. right? So it looks at your moving video and looks for things that are moving quickly. Remember, MPEG stores motion data, right? So when you're doing MPEG, when you're doing encoding with any format that uses motion tracking, motion information, that information can be used by the encoding software to analyze the frame. If it sees a lot of motion information, it knows that a lot of pixels are changing. And that means it will change the bit rate to allow better quality when there's high motion or moderate motion. But when there's nothing moving in the frame, when not much is moving, it can lower the bit rate, right? So overall, you'll get a better quality and a smaller file than if you just picked constant bit rate. And you can see by this graph that a constant bit rate, if you pick 500 kilobits per second, that's your bit rate all the way through. Even if you don't need it, you're going to have that same bit rate, right? So why do you care? Well, Mike, you're boring me stiff with this. I'll tell you why. Because variable bit rate takes time to make. Because the computer, the software, has to do what's called an analysis pass. So there's actually and I'm cutting this entire section here down into just basically 1 or 2 sentences. But if you look at this menu, this is the menu from Media Encoder, and I'll show you these a little bit later, if that works. And you get CBR, constant bit rate, VBR, 1 pass, 2 pass. Well, what are those passes? Those passes are the software analyzing every single frame. So VBR, 2 pass, means the software goes through and looks at every single frame and makes a bunch of calculations, and then does that again and refines those calculations. So you get the highest quality with the lowest possible bit rate that you can get with that quality. It maintains the quality and lowers the bit rate at the same time. VBR 1 pass does a pretty decent job lowering the quality and keeping the bit rate low as well. And CBR doesn't care. Whatever you pick for the bit rate, that's what it does, whether you need it or not. Now, why do you care? Because CBR is hella faster. All you tell the computer is, I need this bit rate, go. It doesn't do any analysis. It starts encoding right away. If you do VBR 1 pass or 2 pass, it can take, well, I don't know if any of you guys have done outputs, but it can take 5, 10 minutes, half an hour, depending on how long your clip is and how much complexity there is. In other words, how many different frames there are with different amounts of motion, right? So I always say, if you want the best, choose VBR, but it's again, we're back in that price, speed, quality triangle. To get that quality of the VBR, you've got to give up the speed. The encode speed takes longer. If you have the time, VBR 2 pass every time, every day. If you don't have the time, you want a quick output. If you're making a quick video for somebody and you need to get it out right away, do a CBR, constant bit rate. All right. Now, those you have to choose. The presets have already chosen those for you. So if you find your output is like, if your encode is taking too long, go into that menu, which is back here, and I'll show you where it is in the media encoder, and you can change it manually. All right. So I'm going to skip all the rest of this kind of stuff because you don't care about the measurements and the like. All right. So you can see that the result will be that the constant bit rate will be a little bit blurrier, possibly, because there's higher motion in the frames with higher motion. Constant bit rate will suffer, right? That's the only difference. So if remember again, price, speed, quality. If you're willing to accept a faster encode, you can sacrifice some of that quality to get that speed. But VBR will give you, by and large, the best. And as this guy says in the slide, you can easily see why VBR, variable bitrate, is preferred. Okay. And I wonder if I should, you know what, I'm going to try, right, because I'm looking at this and it's kind of abstract, right? I'm looking at these menus, I know where they are, and you're looking at them going, what the hell is this? So let me be your guide. Let me see if I can start. I'm going to open up. I'm going to jump in here, folks. I'm going to open up Media Encoder, and we'll give it a try. So file, add source. Just let me find a file here. What have I got? Here we go. All right. And then I go JPEG. No, I don't want that. I want MPEG. There we go. And then I want to go here. Come on. Oh. Right. Now, where is, make sure I got it all. Yeah. All right. So let's see how this goes, everyone. I got the cursor enlarged. Okay, here we go. Share screen. There, share. Okay, can you guys all see this? The green screen with all this text and yak here, it's all working. I think I can see it over here. I got on my student display, I'm seeing it, so I want to make sure you guys can see it. So I can't close this window because we'll lose the share. But you know what? Okay, hang on. I'm going to cancel this. It'll go away, right? Yeah, it'll stop the share. I should show you how I got there. And this is where Zoom sort of falls apart. I will share my Media Encoder window. So here's where you start. So you've got Media Encoder running, right? I've picked a file that I have on my computer. It's called Subsample Errors. It was one of the videos, excuse me, from last week's presentation. I've picked a format, which I'm going to go and modify, and I've got a preset. This preset is for phones, and it's got a variable bit rate. Because it's to make a small file, it's H263, so it's an earlier H series. It's an earlier version of MPEG, not 264, to make a smaller file size. This was just a random preset. If I click on this, oh, wow, now you guys can see that window. I can see that window. I've learned something today, because I'll tell you, Zoom must have changed something, because in the past, when you opened a new window, nobody else would see it but you. I am so pleased. Well, that makes it so much easier to understand where we are. So here's the Media Encoder window. Now you want to customize it, right? So your normal, thing is to say, I want to make a QuickTime file or a MOV file, and I've chosen a format that doesn't offer. Here it is, QuickTime, right? This is your normal thing, and you go to here and you say, I want to do Apple ProRes, or I want to do, I want to pick a H264. And I want to go YouTube format, right? This is what you normally would do, right? Everybody's comfortable with that concept? Cool. Okay. What I'm telling you is you can go in and tweak it. So let's just say we've done our H264. We can say it doesn't. You can do any of these tweaks from pretty much any preset, right? So we're going to pick the YouTube preset. And if we go to YouTube 1080 Full HD, which is what I think I started with, you'll see that the file, I don't know if you guys can read this, but down where the cursor is at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the estimated file size. So this is what's one of the things that's nice about Media Encoder, is it'll give you an idea of how your resulting file is going to be. This is going to be 25 megabits. Now, this is a very short this is a 12-second clip, right? So I'm not sure if I shouldn't have picked a bigger file. I don't really want to, because it'll take a lot longer, but 25 megabits for 12 seconds is a lot of data, right? That's a big file. But nonetheless, Media Encoder gives you this. So here you are, you're on your menu. Most people look at this and go, oh, where's my preset? They click on these first two windows and then they stop. They hit, okay, get me the hell out of here, because man, oh man, there's a lot of stuff I don't quite understand. All right, well, I'm gonna walk you through some of the stuff we've been talking about this morning. So, of course, you can change the file name, right? You can click here and type in a new file name. God, I'm so happy you can see all these windows. This is such an advance for Zoom from just a couple of months ago. I haven't even tried this before live. I'm kind of glad I did. Okay, there's a summary here, right? And if does this work on Zoom? No, you don't see that. Okay, never mind. I can't make this bigger, can I? I am on the bleeding edge now of, oh, do I have options? Can I zoom? No. Dang it. I can annotate. Oh. Hey, look at this. Holy smokes. Okay, so you've got a summary. Oh no. As soon as I annotated, I lost isn't that weird? Okay, let's turn that off. Let's get rid of that. All right, hang on. I was going so well, then I broke it. Yep, now I've broken it. And now the annotations. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share. Start it again. Sorry about this. I'm learning as I go on some of this stuff. There was a reason why I didn't do this before. Okay, so start with a clean window. All right. Open up the thing, Media Encoder. Here we go. I won't annotate. I'll just use the cursor. This gives you a summary of what's going to happen. So first off, you can see what your settings are, right? You see your file name here. You see your frame size. You see your frames per second. So remember, in my first, before I monkeyed around with this was a phone H.263 mobile file size. Now, by the way, look at the size of the file, 499K. Remember, it was 25 megabytes, and now we're half a megabyte. So we have 25 times less data using this new and improved preset. But look at what we've paid for it with. We've got a much lower resolution. We're no longer 1080 HD. We're now 352 by 288, right? We're only 15 frames a second, right? So we've made a bunch of sacrifices. We're doing a VBR, a variable bitrate, because of the low resolution. We want to get a higher quality output if possible. That won't change the file size much, but it'll get a better shot at it, right? So that's what this summary is showing you. And then you've got your audio, 192,000K audio encode, your audio codec AAC, right? I'm sorry, audio codec 128K kilobit, audio codec 32 hertz sampling rate stereo, right? So there's your summary, and that's what it's telling you about your source file or about your output file. And you can compare here in the bottom with your source file. So you can see when you check this, the source file is 1920, 1080, 2997, right? 41 hertz stereo. So you can see that this output has crunched all that stuff down quite a bit. So that's what's going on in this box here. So now let's get back to the point of bit rate. So in the settings down below, you have your tabs: effects, video, audio, multiplexer, captions, publish, right? So in video, we have a bunch of options that we can manually choose. These are chosen for us. So if I change the preset, you watch, these settings will change. If I go to now that QuickTime, or sorry, that H.264 that I chose before, everything changes, right? And we go YouTube, what did I say? YouTube 1080, that's where we were before. So now the summary has changed. Now the output file is the same resolution as the source file, right? Same frame rate as the source file, right? We're doing a VBR 1 pass still, because that's the moderate option, the most economical for time and bandwidth. Audio sampling rate is actually higher than the source. Not that that makes any difference, but it's now been, because this is a YouTube standard, it's now been set to YouTube's 48 kilohertz sampling rate standard. And our video settings now have all changed, right? So when you change the presets, you're just preloading all of these boxes, but you're totally free to go in and change them yourself. So remember I talked about square pixels. You can see here, here's your choices with pixel shapes. I would stay with square unless you're, like I said, working in specialized situations. All right, scroll down a bit more. Render at maximum depth, by the way, is your bit depth. Remember we talked about bit depth before? So you want maximum bit depth. If color is important, then check that box. If color is not so important for your whatever your output is, then don't worry about it. All right. Anyway, moving down. So hardware encoding. This again is a default you want to check. This just means your computer is going to help with the encode with hardware. In other words, the computer you're working on, the phone or whatever, probably your computer, I wouldn't be doing this on your phone, is going to have hardware that it can dedicate to this task, which takes that hardware away from other tasks. So typically when you have hardware encoding set on a media encode situation, it's preferable not to do anything else on the computer until that encode is finished. If you go with software encoding, it's easier on your computer, but it takes more time and there's more math going on because your computer hardware is not helping out, right? But if you need to be doing something in the background while this is encoding, you should probably turn off hardware encoding, which frees up that hardware for you to use for other tasks. I'm explaining that to you, but I would suggest always stay on hardware. And these are the profiles for MPEG, which I won't get into today because it's a bit deeper than we need to. Let's get down to bit depth. Here's the important monkey right here. So here's our three choices. Constant bit rate, right? So if you go to constant bit rate, the first thing that happens is the preset changes to custom up at the top because now it knows you're making a change. But secondly, the bit rate target of 16 megabits per second in this case stays where it was in the preset, right? So as I go through the presets, you'll notice that target bit rate doesn't change. it defaults to what the preset is. And as a result, the file size at the bottom hasn't changed, right? When we start monkeying with these, then you'll see if we start increasing the bit rate, you'll notice down here the file size went up. It's now 48 megabit file. We haven't changed the codec, right? All we've done is we've reserved more data space. All right. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that if your quality is poor, you can reserve more bandwidth, more data space, and let your codec be a bit more efficient to a point. The best thing to do whenever you're going to change the bit rate setting here is start with the preset that you want to sort of emulate. So pick a preset, in this case, the YouTube. Want to go back and reset it, right? Change to your preferred option, and then start working from there. Now, you know that if the target bitrate is 16 for this particular format, there's not a lot of benefit going higher than that, but you can certainly go lower than that. And what you can do with constant bitrate is just simply drop the bitrate down to, let's say, a third lower. Close enough. Down to 18 megabits. So you're in a situation where you're told that your file has to be under 20 megabits. You've picked all your encode. You don't want to mess. You don't want to keep changing codecs to find the right file size. Pick your codec, do what you're going to do, and then just go in and tweak the bit rate down until you're underneath 20 megabits, right? That's kind of what you do this for. But you want to do a variable bit rate, the 2-pass. So let's go back to the preset, sort of clear everything. Let's say you want a better quality without changing the file size. And that's kind of what we all want to do, right? Then what you can do is you can go to this and just change this from the default. The preset defaults to variable bitrate 1-pass to 2-pass. File size remains the same. Don't change the settings, and I'm pointing at the screen with my finger like you can see it. Don't change these settings at all. I don't monkey with these, but now you'll get the benefit of that second computer analysis of your video, and you'll get a slightly better result. It'll take a little longer. Your file size will remain the same, but you will get a higher quality output. Okay? All right. That explains that. Now, one other thing I'll mention just quickly, when we have something here called keyframe distance. When you're making a file for streaming, remember we talked about groups of pictures and having 8 bits and 15-bit, 8 frame and 15 frame groups of pictures in MPEG, and an iframe every 8 or 15 frames. Those are called keyframes in Premiere. And you can move those keyframes for a stream to much further than 8 or 15. That's what that's for. You would never normally adjust this unless you're making files for streaming, all right? Or for editing, you could change this number to 1. So here's a situation. You've got a file you want to re-encode and edit with it. If you change this to 1, then you'll have a keyframe at every frame, all iframe. You'll create an all iframe file, okay? That's what that's all about. All right, oh, click, come on. Oh, now it's gonna act up. Go back and change the setting. Ooh. Okay. And the only other thing is the audio. There's a bunch of other tabs here that you don't have to worry about. These are for things other than, like, for example, the multiplexer is for streaming. Don't worry about that. Captions, if you want to include a caption file, you can add it in the encode. For our purposes, for TV and film, we do the captioning and the editing. But for people who are doing stuff online and have a caption file handed to them later, or they want to add, a caption in other languages, you can certainly put them in here, right? And you would just include your caption file in this data. Anyway, audio. So audio format, they vary depending on what settings you choose. So in this case, we're offered 2, AAC and MPEG. I'm going to try another couple of setups here. Yeah, and they don't really change. You can, you have some control over the codec. Again, I would probably, in fact, go uncompress audio if possible, right? Oh, I've just changed it, dang it. Hang on. But when does this become an issue for you? If you're working with a musician, a composer, a lot of composers want audio only. So you would export this file, you'd go back up here and you turn off video, uncheck. Oh, it's being weird now. Here, cancel this. There, uncheck export video. Now you're making an audio only export for your musician. right? If they want just the audio files from your, or your sound designer, they might just want audio. And then you would go to the audio tab and make some changes, right? If you need to. That's about the only time you would do anything. Other than that, I would select uncompressed audio. All right, so export video. And that's basically all. I'm just gonna double check my slideshow. You won't see it while I'm checking it, but yeah, this talks about MPEG and stuff. Yeah, that's all we have. Okay, so that's kind of that. I'm sorry it wasn't as coherent as most of my fantastic lectures, but it is a difficult subject to teach without you seeing the screen, right? So there you go. I'll stop the recording now. I don't want to record the tears of students.